Hi, this is Praying Medic. Today, I'm going to talk about whether or not President Trump will be charged with obstruction of justice, and I'm going to give an analysis by Alan Dershowitz and Andrew McCarthy. You just want the mass arrest already, right? Well, it's coming. I was noticing some of the blue checks on Twitter are starting to tweet about this mass arrest of people in Congress coming. I don't know if it's fake news. I don't know if there's legit, but I will say this. I've been looking at what George Webb and Luke Rosiak have been reporting on the Owan brothers, and I suspect if there's going to be a large takedown of people in Congress, it's probably going to be related to the Owan brothers scandal. The Owans have been working for a lot of Democrat, I believe, representatives in the House. And when that thing goes down, when it blows up, it is going to take a lot of people down. The Owans should never have been involved in any of the IT works in Congress. And there's a lot of gathering evidence, and the FBI is investigating it. The House is investigating it. So, yeah, you need to be patient. You need to be patient. It's coming. So I had a dream last night, and I'm not going to tell you the entire contents of the dream. I will say this. Andrew McCarthy and I were in the dream, and the dream gave me some confirmation that, as far as God is concerned anyway, I believe I'm on the right track with following Andrew McCarthy and following where he's going with this whole thing with the Mueller investigation. So I'm going to continue, and I'm going to pick up where we left off yesterday. If you were with me on my last broadcast, we talked about the NBC report saying that the Mueller investigation has turned toward an investigation to find out if the president obstructed justice. And look, the holidays are coming, right? Christmas is coming. You're going to be sitting around the Christmas tree with your family and friends talking about, well, what's going on with the investigation into Russia and the president? Would you like to have some good information that you can take to the discussion where you can explain to people what's really going on and what the chances are of Mueller charging the president with obstruction and actually having that charge stick? I'm going to give you today some what I think is very good legal analysis from two really good attorneys who know what they're talking about. Andrew McCarthy, former prosecuting attorney with the Department of Justice. Alan Dershowitz, Harvard law professor. Both well respected. And Dershowitz, by the way, is a liberal. And Dershowitz has been taking a lot of heat from his liberal friends because he is analyzing this whole thing with Mueller and Trump and giving legal opinion on what is going on. And his liberal friends do not like his opinions. And he has lost, apparently, a lot of friends over this whole thing because even though he has a liberal point of view, he can see that some of the things that are going on here don't hold water from a legal standpoint. So we're going to look at what Dershowitz has to say. But first, we're going to look at what Andrew McCarthy has to say about it. And this is in one of his more recent articles. And I'm going to kind of walk you through what Andrew McCarthy sees as far as the direction of Mueller's investigation. What we know about his investigation based on the Manafort and the Flynn charges that were brought. So McCarthy starts out this article, and the article is called, and I tweeted it, it's on my Twitter timeline if you want to go look at it. It's called, "It is now an obstruction investigation." Subtitle is, "That means it's an impeachment investigation." All right, so McCarthy says there's a lot of misinformation and misunderstanding about how a prosecuting attorney or a special counsel would approach a prosecution and setting up witnesses in bringing a case to trial. This is what he says. "Many analysts are under the misimpression that it's typical for federal prosecutors to accept guilty pleas on minor charges in exchange for cooperation that builds a case on major charges. From this flawed premise, they reason that Mueller is methodically constructing a major case on Trump by accepting a minor plea on Mike Flynn and George Papadopoulos for making false statements to the FBI, and indicting Paul Manafort on associate charges that have nothing to do with Trump or the election. And McCarthy says this is not how it works. Either legally or strategically, this is not how you do it. So he says, here's how it actually works. If a prosecutor has an accomplice, cooperator, who gives the government incriminating information about a major scheme under investigation, he pressures the accomplice to plead guilty to the major scheme, not to some ancillary process crime, and particularly not to false statement charges. Strategically, and for public relations purposes, a guilty plea to the major scheme under investigation proves that the major scheme actually happened. In this case, some kind of criminal collusion or conspiracy in Russia's espionage operation against the 2016 election is what they're trying to prove. A guilty plea in which the accomplice explains to the court what he did to help carry out the scheme puts enormous pressure on other accomplices to come forward and cooperate. In a political corruption case, it can drive officials out of office. Justice Department policy calls for prosecutors to indict a defendant on the most serious provable charge, not to plead out a case to minor charges if they're going to obtain cooperation from the witness. The federal sentencing guidelines also encourage this. They allow a judge to sentence a defendant below the harsh guideline calculations if they've cooperated. This can mean that a cooperator gets as little as 0 jail time or time served, no matter how serious the charge might be. This sentencing leniency only happens if the defendant pleads guilty and if they provide substantial assistance to the investigation. That is what enables a prosecutor to entice an accomplice to cooperate with the investigation. The prosecutor doesn't have to entice cooperation by pleading out some minor charge. What they do is they plead you to a major charge and then tell you you can get reduced time or no time or time served as your punishment. So what the DOJ's typically, their strategy is to get witnesses to cooperate with the investigation and plead to the most serious crime. All right. The practice of pressuring a guilty plea to the major charge makes the accomplice a formidable witness in a trial. The jury knows that he's facing a potential sentence at perhaps of decades in prison unless they tell everything they know and they tell the truth. That is what triggers a prosecutor's obligation to file the motion that allows the court to sentence him under the guidelines for the recommended sentence. Trading a plea on a minor charge for cooperation is foolish. All it does is damage the prosecutor's case. It suggests that the cooperator must not have disclosed details about the major scheme. Otherwise, the prosecutor would have charged him with the major scheme. It implies that the prosecutor is so desperate to make a case on the major target that they gave a bad actor a pass on the serious charge, something that experienced prosecutors know that juries hate. It's even worse to plead out an accomplice on a false statement count. This establishes that the main thing the jury needs to know about the witness is that they can't be trusted. That's not how you make someone a strong witness. And unlike the accomplice who pleads guilty to the major scheme, an accomplice who pleads guilty to a false statement is looking at a maximum sentence of 5 years, many times no jail time at all. That's before they cooperate with the investigation. There is no incentive to disclose whatever they know and tell the truth because they're just going to get a slap on the wrist. A good prosecutor doesn't front load the benefits of cooperation. He makes the accomplice earn a lenient sentence by cooperating and telling everything they know. So this is how a prosecuting attorney sets up a case and how they work with witnesses. They generally want them to charge them with the most serious charge possible to get them to cooperate with the promise of a light sentence. All right. The bottom line is, if the FBI had a collusion case of some kind, after a year of intensive investigation, Flynn and Papadopoulos would have been pressured to plead guilty to a very serious charge. And those offenses would be reflected in the charges lodged against Manafort as well. Obviously, the pleas and the indictment have nothing to do with collusion or espionage, because Mueller has no collusion case. All right. So we know that now that Mueller has no case for collusion against Trump, because if he would have had Manafort and Papadopoulos and Flynn plead to some larger charge. The fact that he didn't tells us it's not about collusion anymore for Mueller. And this is what the NBC article that I talked about yesterday, my last broadcast. The NBC article cites anonymous sources who are supposedly inside the Mueller investigation, and they are reporting that Mueller is actually looking at charging Trump with obstruction of justice and not collusion. All right, so we have two different data points that are both pointing and confirming the same idea, that it's not about collusion, it's about obstruction of justice. I'm just laying out for you now the idea that if Mueller's investigation continues to go forward, it's probably going to go in the direction of obstruction of justice. Okay? Now, right, and we do not know if Mueller is a black hat, if he is representing the deep state, or if Mueller is a white hat in disguise who's actually working with Trump. My position at this point is we really don't know. We don't have enough information. I don't think we do. Most people have taken a position. That's fine. I don't think we have enough information right now to make that call. So let me continue with Andrew McCarthy's analysis. Since there is no collusion case, we can safely assume Mueller is primarily scrutinizing President Trump with an eye toward making a case for obstructing the FBI investigation. This also makes sense in light of the pleas that have been taken. Obstruction of justice is actually a process crime. It's somebody getting involved in the investigation and trying to obstruct what the FBI is doing in its investigation. It's a process crime, right? So McCarthy goes on to argue that because Papadopoulos and Flynn were charged with process crimes, lying to the FBI, it's likely that Mueller is also trying to charge Trump with a process crime, obstructing justice, because those two are related. If there was a collusion or espionage charge coming, that's what Flynn and Papadopoulos would have been charged with. All right. The president does have a lot of constitutional powers, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. Before I move on, all right, I'll just finish what McCarthy's article. Assuming that I'm correct about Mueller's theory, it is a fatal flaw as a vehicle for prosecution, as it always has been. As president, Trump has incontestable power to exercise prosecutorial discretion and to fire the FBI director. The case likely that Mueller is trying to build, how did Trump obstruct justice? He fired Comey in the midst of an investigation. So people who want Trump's head on a platter are saying he obstructed justice by firing the FBI director in the midst of an investigation. That's obstruction of justice. McCarthy says, well, Trump is absolutely within his constitutional rights to fire the FBI director in the midst of an investigation. What McCarthy says is what they would try to do is charge Trump with obstruction of justice and then get Congress to try to impeach him based on that. That it's actually moving toward a reason for impeachment. And not that Trump is going to be, criminally charged in court, but that it will give Congress a basis to vote on impeachment. That's where McCarthy is taking this whole narrative. He says that this is driving toward, if Mueller's investigation continues and it looks at charging the president with something, that Mueller is only assisting Congress and giving them a reason to try to impeach the president. Okay? Now I'm going to go over to Dershowitz's article. This article is from June of this year. The title of it is Trump Did Not Obstruct Justice. History, Precedent, and Comey Prove It. So, in 1992, then President George Herbert Walker Bush pardoned Caspar Weinberger and 5 other individuals who had been indicted or convicted in connection with the Iran-Contra arms deal. Okay? In 1992, President Bush pardoned Caspar Weinberger and 5 other individuals who were indicted or already convicted in the Iran-Contra scandal. Okay? The special prosecutor, Lawrence Walsh, was furious, accusing Bush of stifling his ongoing investigation and suggesting that he may have done it to prevent Weinberger or the others from pointing the finger of blame at Bush. The New York Times reported that the investigation might have pointed to Bush himself. This is what Walsh said. The Iran-Contra cover-up, which has continued for more than 6 years, has now been completed with the pardon of Caspar Weinberger. We will make a full report on our findings to Congress and the public describing the details and the extent of this cover-up. Yet President Bush wasn't charged with obstruction of justice or impeached, nor have any other presidents who interfered with ongoing investigations or prosecutions been charged with obstruction of justice. It's true that among the impeachment charges leveled against Richard Nixon, one was for obstructing justice, but Nixon committed the independent crime of instructing his aides to lie to the FBI, a violation of Section 101 of the Federal Criminal Code. So Nixon was charged with obstruction of justice because he told his people under him to lie to the FBI. And actually, that is one of the things that is being considered in the Mueller investigation, is whether or not Trump told Flynn to lie to the FBI. In this article by NBC that I talked about yesterday on my last broadcast, they're trying to figure out, did Trump tell Flynn to lie to the FBI? Because if Trump told Flynn to lie, then he's guilty of essentially the same thing that Nixon was guilty of when he told his aides to lie to the FBI. You can't instruct your staff to lie to the FBI. If they do, they can be charged. If you tell them to, you can be charged, right? I think it's very unlikely that Trump actually told Flynn to lie to the FBI. I would have a really hard time believing that, but let's continue. It's against this background and this history and precedent that the Comey statement must be considered. Comey himself acknowledged that throughout history, some presidents have decided that because problems come from justice, they should try and hold the department close, but blurring those boundaries ultimately makes the problem worse by undermining public trust in the institutions and their work. Comey has also acknowledged that the president had the constitutional authority to fire him for any or no reason at all. Trump also had the constitutional authority to order Comey to end the investigation of Flynn. All right? Comey admitted that if Trump wanted to, he could have told Comey, you are done with the Flynn investigation, it is over. Trump has the constitutional authority to do that. And we're going to get into that because it's important. Trump could have pardoned Flynn if he wanted to, as Bush pardoned Weinberger, and that would have ended the Flynn investigation, as Bush ended the Iran-Contra investigation before it was completed. What Trump could not do is what Nixon did, direct his aides to lie to the FBI or commit other independent crimes. And there is no evidence that Trump did that. With these factors in mind, let's turn to the Comey statement. Former FBI Director James Comey's written statement, which was released in advance of his testimony before the Senate Intelligence Committee, does not provide evidence that President Trump committed obstruction of justice or any other crime. Indeed, it strongly suggests that even under the broadest reasonable definition of obstruction, no such crime was committed. The crucial conversation occurred in the Oval Office on February 14th between President and then Director Comey. According to Comey's contemporaneous memo, the President expressed his opinion that Flynn is a good guy. Comey replied, he is a good guy. The President said the following, I hope you can see your way clear to letting this thing go. Comey understood that to be a reference only to the Flynn investigation and not to the broader investigation into Russia or links to the campaign. Comey had already told the President, we're not investigating him personally. Comey understood the President to be requesting that we drop any investigation of Flynn in connection with false statements about his conversations with the Russian ambassador in December. Comey did not say he would let this go, and he did not grant the President's request to do so, nor did Comey report this conversation to the Attorney General or any other prosecutor. He was troubled by what he regarded as a breach of recent traditions of the FBI independence from the White House, though he recognized that throughout history, some presidents have decided that because problems come from the Department of Justice, they should try to hold the department close. That is an understatement. Now, let me explain what that means. And Dershowitz is going to go into kind of a history here. Throughout American history, from Adams to Jefferson to Lincoln to Roosevelt and even Obama, presidents have directed and not merely requested the Justice Department to investigate, prosecute, or not prosecute specific individuals or categories of individuals. It's only recently that the tradition of an independent Justice Department and FBI has emerged, but traditions, even salutary ones, cannot form the basis of a criminal charge. It would be far better if our Constitution provided for prosecutors who are not part of the executive branch, which is under the direction of the President. In Great Britain, in Israel, and other democracies that respect the rule of law, the Director of Public Prosecution or the Attorney General are enforcement officials who by law are independent of the Prime Minister. But our Constitution makes the Attorney General both the chief prosecutor and the chief political advisor to the President on matters of justice and law enforcement. And this is a really interesting point that Dershowitz is getting at here. Jeff Sessions, when he goes into these Senate and House Intelligence Committee meetings, they're always asking Sessions these questions about conversations he's had with the President. And Sessions often refuses to answer these questions. And that's because, in addition to being the head prosecutor of the DOJ, Sessions is Trump's main legal counsel. And they have attorney-client privilege. Now, in Great Britain, that would not be the case because the prosecutor's office is separate from the Prime Minister. But because we have the FBI and the DOJ are part of the executive branch, the President is their boss. The President can tell them who to prosecute. He can fire them. He can hire them. He can direct all of that, and that is perfectly allowed by the Constitution. And Dershowitz argues we would probably be better off if that weren't the case, but that is the case. Assume, for the sake of argument, that the President had said the following to Comey: you are no longer authorized to investigate Flynn because I've decided to pardon him. Would that exercise of the President's constitutional power to pardon constitute a criminal obstruction of justice? Of course not. Presidents do that all the time. The first President, Bush, pardoned Caspar Weinberger, his Secretary of Defense, in the middle of an investigation that could have incriminated Bush. That was not an obstruction of justice, and neither would the pardon of Flynn have been a crime. A president cannot be charged with a crime for properly exercising their constitutional authority. For the same reason, President Trump cannot be charged with obstruction for firing Comey, which he had the constitutional authority to do. Comey's own statement suggests that one reason the President fired him was because of his refusal or failure to publicly announce that the FBI wasn't investigating him personally. Trump repeatedly told Comey, hey, why don't you get that fact out? Why don't you tell the people that I'm not under investigation? Again, that is not obstruction of justice. Dershowitz goes on to wrap up his summary, but basically says, there is nothing as far as we know in what Trump has said and done with respect to Flynn and the Russia investigation that would give Mueller any legitimate basis to charge him with obstruction of justice. All Trump has done is exercise his constitutional powers. And that is, for the coming weeks, as Mueller's investigation continues, as we get more information and as we find out more about what Mueller's investigation is doing, I think it's good to just keep in mind the fact that it seems from two very good legal experts, it seems very unlikely that Mueller is going to make any charge of obstruction of justice stick against the president. It just doesn't seem like there's a good legal basis for it for the coming years. Right. I mean, I'm kind of working on the assumption that Mueller's investigation is going to be wrapping up soon. Trump said that he believes Comey's investigation will be done by the end of the year. Some people believe Mueller's going to sit around for another year or two and he's going to just keep on investigating people and keep on making money. I don't know. But I would say that I think we can all have a little bit of peace over this in knowing that some very good legal experts have looked at this and said, really, there isn't a whole lot of that Mueller could do legitimately to hurt the president, unless it's just to try to give Congress another reason to try to impeach him. And even if Congress does vote to impeach the president again, like they did last week, probably won't work. One of the things that I see that seems to indicate that the president is gaining favor among Congress is Mitch McConnell is no longer pushing back and obstructing what the president wants to do. And in the last week, Paul Ryan has taken the president's side on DACA and the budget. Paul Ryan said a week ago that when Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer refused to show up at the meeting with the president over the budget, he said, DACA is now off the table because you didn't show up at the meeting. DACA is off the table. We are not putting DACA in this budget. It's not going to happen. And when I first read that article, I thought, wow, that's really unusual for Paul Ryan to take that, because Ryan has been entertaining everything that Nancy and Chuck have wanted for a long time. But all of a sudden, Ryan is now taking a stance and he's backing the president. And today, there's an article that Ryan has again said, DACA is not going to be discussed in the budget. They can talk about it next year in March. It's not going to be involved in the budget talks. So what I see is a lot of congressional leaders who seem to they recognize that Trump has the wind at his back, and they're now getting on, I don't know if they're getting on the Trump train, but they seem to be, their opposition to what the president wants to do is much less than it was. They seem to be, warming up and cozying up to the president in the last few weeks. And I don't think it's a coincidence that this has all happened as people have been stepping down from Congress amid sexual scandals. I suspect that Paul Ryan knows more more representatives are going to be stepping down because of the scandals. And I think Ryan knows that Trump is playing his hand and he has the goods on a lot of dirty people. And I think Ryan has now realized, I am not going to stop Trump. I'm not going to obstruct him anymore. I'm going to go along and get whatever he wants done. So I see in what's going on in Congress more support for the president, even though some people are, there's these sexual allegations that came out again from these women. I think that will all go away pretty quickly. Doesn't seem like there's a lot of legitimacy to it. These people have been out there for a long time. Their coming forward seems to be politically timed. I don't think it presents a real threat to what Trump is doing. So that's just my take on it. I'm not saying Paul Ryan isn't a swamp creature and Mitch McConnell isn't the swamp creature. They are. But look, they see the swamp is being drained. All right? They are looking at what's happening and they're seeing all these people go down. They're watching the swamp being drained. And you are a swamp creature. You have to decide, do I want to go down that drain or do I want to stay in my little swampy job? If I do, I have to get on board with the guy who is running this operation. And I think McConnell and Ryan are smart enough to know Trump has got a good game plan and he's going to win this. So they're getting on his side. Doesn't mean they're not swampy. It just means I think they've recognized who the boss is and they're getting in line with the boss. So that's my view for what it's worth. All right. Denise says I have to go shopping with her. So I'm going to let you all go. Thank you for joining. I love doing these updates. I'll continue. I have a few more. I want to do a thread that Sundance did. I'd like to do a little broadcast on Adam Schiff. People are asking, did Adam Schiff leak to CNN? And there's this issue with Orr and his wife. There's all kinds of information coming out on that. I will be doing broadcasts on those subjects probably tomorrow and the next day. We got the Roy Moore election today. Lots of interesting things going on. Is my book done? Which book? I am working on audiobooks, by the way. Somebody asked. Yes, audiobooks are coming out as I have time. But I'm spending a lot of time doing research on politics and current events because that seems to be what God wants me to do for right now, at least temporarily. But I'm still working on books. My editor has my novel. She's working through it. And I hope to have that out soon. I don't have a timeline on it. But that is all I have for today. I love you guys. You're amazing. Take care, and I'll catch you on the next broadcast.